everyone. You are watching the New Evening Isle Conversation Series. I am here with Mr. G. Lucas Crane. So G. Lucas Crane, also known as Non-Horse, is a performance artist that notably uses cassettes as performance instruments, a recherche artistic practice that only the likes of Akiona and Liz Harris have mastered. His inventive techniques go beyond any knowledge of cassette tape techniques known to the mainstream public. He hammers his fingers into tapes, mixes them, reverses them, and subsequently utterly loses track of time in his performances, which manifests in his every action. His movements is audible and transforms sound into touch despite the sprawling sounds that overwhelm the senses of the listeners in his audience. He has released many numerous innovatory sonic records, such as Peace Ninja, Pink Light, and Troll Zaibatsu, all of which are available on Bandcamp and Discogs.com. The links for both of these will be in the description. So where I will start now is on your website, you label a lot of your work and you categorize them as psychosocial art. Why do you call them psychosocial art?
Well, okay, psychosocial art, because the second you start to sit down to divide things into categories, as like even as a as an approach in your life to try to make sense of things you do, at some point there comes a realization that it is actually that a lot of these things kind of relate together in mysterious and deep ways. So that designation on my website is me trying to like get seemingly disparate like things in my life together into one big category, or to at least have a category where when I'm thinking about stuff from my past or projects I've done or new projects I want to do, that there is enough of a recognition that like just making like sound out of something often has a lot of other more complicated context to it, like around itself. So one of the reasons I'm using that term like distinctly is that for a very long time I lived in and was part of like a music venue, kind of like DIY like show space kind of culture that exists in America and the world. Instead of going to a normal institution that says like museum outside of it or something like that, you and a group of artists get together and kind of do performances or make art just in your kind of living space, and you have this kind of like localized, unofficial setting to make your art. So when I put psychosocial art in there, I mean that like the art that you make is not necessarily just the output. It's not just the content. It's the content plus its context. And when we receive art and experience art as content, we very often are required to forget about the context. You're downloading the way you can get in touch with an artist or get as close to an artist as possible is maybe you go to their Bandcamp, you download some of their stuff, you Google them, you read about it, and this is how like we get with each other. But there's all sorts of, but for like the artists themselves, like pieces that they make come out of like a lot of other context around it and in one's life. So, back to your question, like I'm kind of using that term as an inspirational term for me. So when I'm categorizing my own stuff, I have to like be really clear about how important the context was for this piece of work. Like I can make music, I can just like, here, I made a track, and then you ask me about it, you're like, hey, what was that track about? And I'm like, the definition is I'm not talking about this, the music speaks for itself, and that's like zero context. Like the artist is not giving you any context. I'm a big blabbermouth. If you ask me about work, my reflex is to talk about it. So psychosocial is like, this is my music. There's lots of deep stories about it if you want to know about it. That kind of thing. So I'm just trying to like mix it up in my own head and kind of get it across that like there's not just content to things, there's context too.
That's very insightful. That's very applicable, I think, to a lot of independent artists for sure. There's out of these hundreds of ideas that you have, only 5 of them are going to be manifested. So you try to include all that internalization and all the conceptualization that goes on into producing such artworks as well. So.
Yeah, if you I think it's part of the natural kind of art making cycle where you you work on something and it's very personal, and then you keep working on it, and if you don't abandon it and it actually makes it through like your, you know, like one of your milestones of like, okay, this is a piece I'm interested in or something, you get to this point where like you have to, like, very often, like, say where you are in your practice, like if you go to apply for a grant or you even try to tell someone about it, maybe that's the first thing. You're like, hey, I'm working on this thing, I really like it, what is it? Someone's like, well, what are you working on? And in that moment you have to collapse all of the stuff in your work into like an intelligible phrase. Or God forbid you're trying to apply for some sort of grant and you have to categorize intensely what you're doing, and in that moment you have to strip it of a lot of its personal stuff to you. You have to like articulate it, and this is outside the bounds of the work itself. You have to talk about, so it's like talking about making work is part of making work. You don't just make the work. If you're lucky, you just make the work and you live in a room and then some person you pay comes out of somewhere and grabs it and takes it into the world. But if you are like a, you know, if you're an artist who's doing everything, sooner or later you have to like articulate to someone else, and then it becomes like less, it has to become less complicated. You have to categorize it. And that in my artist's brain, I always think of that moment. It's like, how can you categorize the wind? How can you define lightning? You know, the stars themselves. But no, we're at this part in this like art making cycle where you're just like, someone's knocking on the door and they're like, hey, what are you working on there? And you're like, I'm working on this. And it's like pretty, it creates this like moment of honesty with what you've been doing and how your own work, how you relate to your own work, you know. If that answers, I wasn't even answering your question, I was just riffing.
Yeah, no, it's wonderful. So what do you like the most about this? What do you even want to call it? Cassette art? What do you call it?
Yeah, when people ask me, like what I was just saying, when people are like, so what are you doing in there? I generally refer to it as tape manipulation. That very quickly gets across the aspects of my work that I think are important, which is that one, it's on cassette distinctly, and two, the literal definition of the word manipulation. You are approaching this object that is itself a piece of media in any way that you can. You know, like if I didn't like it so much, I would have stopped doing it a long time ago, and I obviously still like it. So I manipulate sounds on tape is the quickest, you know, cocktail party definition of something that I say without too much, you know, pretension or anything like that. You know, you can get into it, you can give a very large, like, you know, effluvious definition, but I manipulate sounds on cassette for specific reasons, you know. Like on purpose, you know.
So what is your favorite part about it? What is it about it that really sparked this long line of work you've produced? What keeps you going about tape manipulation? Why is it so liberating for you?
Well, I gotta say, the definition definitely changes as, you know, like I've been dealing with this a lot as we like go through history. Like here we are all immersed in the history of the development of the tools that we use to change media and make media art. You know, I think I said a little bit about it a few minutes ago, but there's always this moment where I like my like joke curmudgeon like chip on my shoulder thing where I'm like, I'm like mad at guitars or slightly more traditional instruments because of the facility and ease that they just find themselves in social contexts. You know, you're in the forest sitting on stumps hanging out and someone has an acoustic guitar behind them and it's like butter. They just pull it out and start strumming it and everyone just accepts it. No one's like, what, put that guitar away. I mean, usually that's insufferable sometimes, so you're like, you should put that away. Why did you bring that into the forest? But there's this moment where I'm interested, the personal moments where I'm still like extremely excited about manipulating sounds on a very old transmission system, is because the relationship to that point in time technologically like gives me a very like it's like a constantly interesting oscillation with contemporary musical standards as they develop. You know, I've spent a very long time manipulating sounds on tape. You spend any amount of time doing something, practicing, you get very good at it. The absurdity of getting very, very good at mixing sounds on cassette, an old ass medium that maybe nobody likes for that. You know, like I was working in like an actual studio, you know, like a higher end studio, and I remember people talking about like plug-in emulations for like tape stuff, and you know, and like them talking about and just general like conversations in like professional studios about like how cool these times are now technologically. You know, like you can get whatever you want. You dial everything in. You reduce all variables to nothing. You know, you just like it's anything you want, you can get it. There's a technological solution for anything, and that is very exciting. Like as a sound maker, as an artist, as a like a media manipulator, I want to stress I love music technology and the evolving technology of music, like how instruments change over time, the like how something like a synthesizer, like the history of the development of it with respect to its audience and its users of listener, its audience of listeners and users. You know, that's very interesting to me. Tape still interests me intensely because it's this like ancient form for all of the things that we do now. So when I manipulate sounds on tape, it is shunting all of this stuff into the technological past. Like I can take like 30 YouTube videos and put them all on a tape, and it's almost like sending it back in time in terms of like its fidelity and its use in contemporary musical scenarios. You know, like I use like contemporary musical technology, like your digital audio workstation and your samplers. You're like I'm like, well, I just came up with this sampler. Wow, they certainly solved every problem I had back the last time I used this particular brand of sampler. But for tapes, it's about like a qualitative relationship to the data, to the sound data, to the music, to the audio that I am like interested in. It is like putting something on a tape, sends it back in time, changes the fidelity into like kind of a past fidelity, makes the sound data that you put on it really, it just makes it misbehave with respect to contemporary audio technology. You know, like contemporary audio technology, things sync together, things behave together, samplers talk to each other, like computer talks to sampler, like you plug things in and they make sense together. So being able to still go back and be like absurdly good, where my hands are just like manipulating tapes and my brain is like, you know, off somewhere, like to be able to like return to an ornery, misbehaving, like objectively terrible in a lot of ways, in a lot of contemporary ways, sound medium that has this connection to the developmental history of all kind of sample-based work, is still incredibly exciting. That's the answer to your question. It's still incredibly exciting because it doesn't do what you want, it doesn't play nice with contemporary stuff, and it is a known fidelity like universe where you put something into it and it, you know, it's like the same reason why you would go and download a bunch of free plugins that you found because like that someone sent you, because you're like, oh, I want to play around with this, I want to try all these things and find a voice in there. Like at this point, like for me, philosophically, kind of existentially, sounds on tape are kind of me. Like it's like it describes like my inner world of like terrible, glitchy, misbehaving media, which still exists. Like media misbehaves in a different way these days, but for me it's like the text of like hey, we got this way of like this text of this like primordial like machine for doing what people still want to do now, but it's like the first time we kind of standardized it to a level where it became very accessible to large numbers of people. The simple, like K7, like the simple, because this format, this specific format, which wasn't the first kind of tape, is misbehaving in a certain way. Like always misbehaving, always like always misbehaving, always like skewed or screwed up to a certain degree, but still sort of, it's like the first time it became even standardized and controllable to any degree. And that exact aspect illuminates inspiration, like it foments inspiration inside the mind, like the fact that it's still this like nexus of chaos, but can still be like controlled to a certain artistic degree. It took me a very long time to be able to control cassette tapes to a degree that I find musically pleasurable, because like I am at the end of the day trying to make music that I like, like even if everything about it, like, even if it's like half an hour, 150 layered like drone, like, void compositions that are completely not accessible to most people, like atemporal, like all this stuff. Even if it's that, it's still like, this sounds kind of ridiculous for it to come out of my mouth, but it's still me making like a kind of music that I want, that I'm looking for. It's still me trying to like understand, music, which is like humans take sound and give it to each other. That's music for me. Like just the transmission from human to other human. It's not like something you do in your house. It's alone forever. It's always between at least two people. Like it's human connection stuff. So like that's why this is total chaos, but it's also like the lowest bar for accessibility for me to a lot of people, to this kind of stuff.
Sounds like there's a love of sophistication there, a personal love for pushing things to their boundaries.
Well, I mean, I there's a lot of like, I'm just constantly trying to kind of be honest with myself, like when you're making very experimental music, like that term is terrible in a lot of ways and useless for a lot of people. Experiment, because an experiment is like on the road to, the word experiment is like on the road to something, to like a conclusion. And if you just experiment endlessly, like, isn't that self-indulgent to a certain degree? So like our terms are imperfect, but like I'm trying to like access like a certain level of like self-honesty with this kind of stuff. Like, if that makes any sense,
It's wonderful. So what got you, so this is kind of a two-part question, like who do you admire musically, and what ties, like, of these musicians you admire got you first started into this tape manipulation that you've been working on for almost 2 decades now?
Well, I first got into it because I when I was like about in my 20s or something like that, and I first of all, I didn't kind of start out like playing music. I started out wanting to write poetry and to kind of like perform poetry. There's a very like it's not just writing, it's telling other people. There's a performance aspect to what I'm talking about. Like that is the reason why I play tapes in the manner that I do. Like
sound poetry or something?
Yeah, like I'm inspired by wordsmiths. I like the performance of language. I enjoy that. So I kind of came out of like writing and putting words on tape and having them play at the same time as someone's talking and stuff like that. So there's like a kind of rich tradition as like a tape is a very quick sampler. It's a very quick way. You take a blank tape, you stick it in the thing, you hit record, you say the thing, and then you rewind, and then you hit play, and it's gone. It's going. It's like there's no menu diving. There's no contemporary digital like, dimension hopping that you have to do in your mind. get on a screen, that kind of thing. So it's a very quick and dirty way of like of replicating kind of a sonic idea. By that I mean like you're taking a moment that is happening and you're hitting record. You're making that decision to hit record. And in the back of my mind, the amount of menus you have to do to get through that kind of thing like changes your brain. You know, like you have to go from different part of your brain to different part of your brain depending on how you're sampling the world. So, you know, like your question was about like who inspires me. I'm really inspired by like the people who I was kind of directly interested in when I started like actually using tapes to make music in bands were people like Christian Marclay, people like I was really you know, like conceptual sound artist kind of stuff, but it's like Christian Marclay and then the Executioners, like turntablism, early turntablism, even like, you know, like Kid Koala and like Def Jux stuff and like early you know, like just like manipulators who also are performing songs. Like you take like people who are really technically proficient at something that they're doing in like a DJ context. The DJ is in service of a composition ultimately. Like their DJ is training in a room like a fucking ninja, and then the ninja has to go on mission, you know, and you go and you like perform. So there's like, I was incredibly personally inspired by early turntablism. I'm from Brooklyn. New York like is like where hip hop was, like a certain type of hip hop turntablism was invented in the Bronx, you know, like, you know, by like black artists like mixing in parks, you know, like that level of like innovation to take a machine and to use it in a way that it technically wasn't designed to be used for, like to be manipulated as like in that manner. That's the most inspiring thing to me ever, and that keeps me going to this day. Like set principles of experimenting with music. It's like take a thing that has been designed for one thing and to use it at cross purposes, to use it for a way that it was not technically designed for, in that little space in between what the thing was designed to do and what the thing can do. That's where the geniuses are, in that space, you know. And like early turntablism and early hip hop, like just from a how we are using the machines of this world sense is absolutely inspiring. Like that feeds me to this day, like because now because you know, like it's a really good example, the DJ mixer, you know, just the mixer. So people are starting out you know, beat juggling and, you know, like putting stickers on the record and cueing to that point and then just juggling the break, you know, over and over again forever. Like that kind of sonic innovation is like right there in the stuff. But like now, but at the beginning, they had to take that mixer that was for like a stereo system and just use it for this like really high order, like high wire act, like you know, really intense use, like public use, where you practice so much that you just don't fail, like you don't drop the beat, you know, like. And now they design mixers to do that easily, and the people who developed it did it on machines that were not developed for that. Like then the like what it winds up being used to do then influences the design of the machine itself. And then here we have the history of the design of that mixer, and now crossfader mixers are, you know, like frictionless, blah blah blah. But like now we get to this like where the faders are frictionless and it's just very easy to like make transitions. But then you go even beyond that, and now the mixers are like make nice with everything. Now they you know, are Traktor, like they sync with Serato. They like, you know, they go in and they manipulate your Traktor DJ session, you know. They make sense with the greater world of musical accoutrements, you know. So for me, the like that history is inspiring, and I'm greatly inspired by the development of the machines people who make specific types of work, and how that types of work re-influences the machines themselves. We have like cassettes, used to just take a memo, or to, there's several kinds of cassettes. There's like metal cassettes for where they're supposed to be for music or something, and then there's like normal cassettes, and they're not technically music grade, and they're just for notes or something. If you're a journalist or something, you're taking notes. But to use those things musically, like, it still means something to me. Like, it's still like, you're still kind of like, you're within the history, and you're playing the different parts of the history of the development of the machine off against itself. That kind of thing. So, John, you'll have to excuse me. Anybody who knows me knows this. I have a tendency to blab on, and I will take any tangent and just fucking run with it. So if you want to keep me on question, go ahead and jump in. Okay.
Right. So tell us about the Nova drones that are for sale on your website.
Well, you're reminding me that I really need to edit my website. The Nova drones are no longer available as of a few years ago, but it was a synthesizer that I designed with my friend Peter Edwards of Casper Electronics, who's an amazing. If anybody wants to get into DIY electronics and stuff like that, has an amazing career and has a lot of resources out there for like kind of hacking, like low skill accessibility to like doing electrical engineering for creative reasons. But it was a synthesizer that he and I designed to kind of sit in this very like distinct place in like the world of synthesizer kits. It's extremely straightforward. All the things that all the components that it's made out of are extremely cheap, very straightforward, and we developed it to be kind of a very, very accessible way of getting 6 oscillators and being able to sync them up, play around with them, and be able to build it yourself. And then also, very importantly, the synth itself, while being very simple and accessible and straightforward, has like a whole deeper kind of infinite world, like that you can fall into, of interactivity, kind of, like that. I'm talking about the light. There's a very bright tricolor LED on it that interacts in certain ways that you can switch around with the oscillators. To me, that's the whole thing. Like the fact that there's 6 oscillators, you can go and buy 6 oscillators. You can go and like program 6 oscillators into Max MSP. You can do anything you want. There's lots of ways to get 6 oscillators and play around with them. But the idea of having like a very bright interactive light source, tricolor light source that interfaces with 6 oscillators, the fact that the piece itself runs between use of the piece itself runs between the audio visual spectrum, like there's a lot in there, that even I and even the inventors of it, even the like producers of it, can't know the full extent of what you can do with it. Like there's just too much in there. There's like the LED is triggered by the oscillators in a bunch of switchable ways, and it's like that is just the combinations of that kind of stuff, and being able to put that into your creative set and like electronics you already have. For me, that was always like the beyond my imagination. Like the audiovisual spectrum is, and translating in between those two things is important to keep thinking about, even if you don't. You're like, oh, I'm going to stay in sound. That's my wheelhouse. It's like, well, I'm going to turn a light on during my set. Like, I want to step out of the sonic world. Like there's just like little ways that you can get people to kind of understand the wider world of interrelationships between mediums, I guess. You know what I mean?
So let's say in the future, this tape manipulation projects you work on, and that very, very few others, admittedly, say that do work on, and let's say they get exposure to larger audiences, how would you desire them to react to this very esoteric, very avant-garde style?
Well, Well, I gotta say, every couple of years, basically every 2 years, 1.5 years, there is a video from 1996 or something of a Russian DJ called DJ Tape that goes viral, like minimally viral, every 1.5 years. And it's this Russian DJ at a 1994, 1996 DJ competition who has a crossfader mixer and two reel-to-reel tape decks. And he is scratching and remixing, you doing that. And the answer to your question is on those threads in Twitter. It's like, I'm like, what do I want people to do? Like, people are like, wow, look at this guy go. Like, he's doing the beat juggling thing, except with tapes, you know? like, I would like it for people to not, like, maybe openly mock me right away, because that happens every time I stick my neck out. No, what I'm saying is, you know, I'll take the mockery. Tapes are disgusting, misbehaving, objectively sonically terrible sonic objects. If you are drawn to that kind of palette, you will be interested in them. If, like so many out there in the history of the development of machines and recorded media, wish that the noise floor would be quieter and wish I could have independent control of a lot more stuff. I wish I could slow the pitch down, but also keep the turn the speed down, but keep the pitch the same. You know, the music equipment we've got now is great, you know, so like the way I approach, you know, sonic skullduggery and trickery is I would like to think, okay, wait, just to directly answer your question, I'd like people to see me playing and be like, he's really spent a long time doing that. Like, he clearly knows what he's doing. You know, like the worst thing ever, experimental musicians have the worst reputation in just masturbating, you know? And like, I'm not masturbating. I really learned how to mix tapes. Like, maybe that seems absurd. It's like, Lucas, weren't you like thinking about like what would be more useful in the future? I'm like, no, I spent 10,000 hours mixing cassette tapes with a crossfader mixer, and now I can beat juggle, like, you know, like on cassettes. Great, you know. I'm trying to like, I'm making music in a way that's particular to me. I built my instrument. I built my technique. That's my art. That's psychosocial art. You know, like, I'm not just like, when you hear something I'm doing, you're hearing a technique I developed, not just the equipment, you know? So I don't know the exact answer to your question. Like, it's a very, like, your question is also a very modern question. I'm like, sooner or later, people see you on the internet, and then everyone's got a take, you know? And so it's like, it can happen to any of us at any moment. You can become the main character of the internet. And it's like, I don't know. I've been made fun of on like NPR, you know? like you can't really like, I've heard it all. Like, yes, I know tapes are stupid. They're actually amazing, honey. You know, like, I'm just saying, like, experimental music might get a bad rap from the perspective of contemporary pop music, but you can't get rid of the freaks. Like, people will always be attracted to
You think it will always
strange.
have a bad rep?
What's that?
You think it will always have a bad rep? The whole
Did what? Did me?
No. Experimental, like, people who really push the grounds.
Oh, I mean, no. I mean, from a certain perspective. We, like, in our media diets these days, humans spend a lot of time immersed in very orthodox media spaces. You know, like, you watch like a show, you watch a streaming show, all of the ways that the sound design is made are done by professionals. Like, everyone is at the top of their industry. Maybe, you know, who knows if they're the best, but they are really good at navigating that industry. So like, one of the permanent states that we as media consumers and people who consume art and people who make art right now is, like, I gotta tell you, is most of the stuff, like 90%, 99, 95% of the stuff that we consume as media comes from a very similar tradition of, like, popular music, popular stuff, like sound design that is controlled, that is hyper processed for perfection or in some way. It's very like there's every project has a million cooks in the kitchen, like double checking and checking itself that it is up to acceptable standards, and that's just the likelihood of what we are going to consume unless you go seek out stuff that is distinctly not like that. So when I say there will always be freaks, I'm not lying. That's like it's a natural reaction to being immersed in total orthodoxy and kind of the same media. You want to start the recording again? Okay, cool.
All right.
Okay, I think I know exactly where I was. Here's where I was. The media landscape that people normally live in is extremely orthodox. I think everyone subconsciously knows this. If you realize this,
Always has.
you go and what's that?
Always has been.
Right, always has been. Right, exactly. And it's pernicious. We never escape. Like us, we go and to do different things, and we everything we go and do is actually most of the time we spend our time in the same kind of media orthodoxy of like standards and practices and how processed something is and how like what the fidelity is and how you accept it. If you have any interest in anything other than that, you will go and find these freaks. You will find people like me who delight in, and I even have to use these objective terms. Yeah, like I when I'm talking, I mean from the perspective of the world that we have to pretend that we live in all the time. What I do and what experimental musicians do is not only on some level ridiculous, but counterproductive. You know, like it's like the old saying, like, you want someone to come to your show. You're in a rock band. You say there's experimental parts of your music technically. You don't necessarily play that up because people who want to come for the rock and roll aren't going to like that stuff. You know, like experimental musicians get a bad rap for wanking, for being wankers, but it's not true all the time. There's wankers everywhere. You know, like there's wankers in any scenario. So when I'm using these terms, like I play this game with myself all the time, where the language that we have to describe this stuff is against us. Like I'm being like, tapes, the sound on tapes are objectively terrible. It's like I had to use that phrase because if this video you're recording ends up online, I don't want to be someone to tell me that I don't know what I'm doing from the perspective that person's talking from. Like, I understand that tapes have terrible fidelity, that they have a high noise floor, that they are bad for reproducing certain things. But they communicate an idea outside of the orthodoxy we live in purely because progress moves on and technological progress is, you know, metastasizes as like forward progress with nothing else, and we always have to, everything has to disrupt the thing that came before. But the things that came before, the things that sit in like a technological garbage heap, still have things to say and still say things about the time that they were in, and because they are the forebearers of the technology and the culture and the music we make now, still have stuff to say about this, about what we make now. You know, experimenting still is like a part of life.
Yeah, in one way that whole orthodox music mentality is counterproductive is, you know, you hear those same people all the time say, like, you feel free to be yourself, it's okay to be your own weird little creature. But as soon as you truly deviate from the norm, as Frank Zappa would say, as soon as you truly deviate from the norm, you're all done. You're not going to be on the charts anymore. You know, you're going to be expatriated and ostracized for being different. So it's not like it's do as I say, not as I do. And I think to the fullest extent, you know, people love familiarity still. And, you know, in one of the most brilliant books I've ever read, John Cage's Silence and Lecture Writings, you know, he says it's not like experimental unless you're unfamiliar with what you're doing. You know. Yeah.
Yes.
That whole mentality has existed, as I say, for hundreds of years, probably since the Renaissance era. That it's all based on orthodoxy and rules, and it's a learned operation. you know.
Yeah, and
That's
it's not knowing what you're doing to a certain degree within your own work. You
yeah,
know, like it's not taking the image of what you're doing that you're receiving as what it is. Like to you, it still has personal work. You know, like John Cage is right. That that book is amazing. But I always, whenever I read any John Cage, in the back of my mind is John Cage hated jazz. You know,
really.
and so I'm like, even Mr. Cage, like, had like the space to be a certain kind of experimental. You know, so you're trying to get out of boxes, like people like the external world the reviews your work and tries to put everybody in a series of boxes, and you want to explode those boxes and get outside those boxes. And there's a lot, like one of the best things John Cage ever did for the world was write as much as he did, rather than like the actual compositions he produced. I always appreciate the fact that he just wrote so much, because even like within the context of like he's writing a paper for an academic conference, or you know, it's very useful to lay people. It's very useful to people who maybe aren't experimental musicians. There's a way you can get into it. You know, there's a lot of pithy quotes, and that's extremely important. I appreciate that level of explanation of a very difficult to explain thing. But John Cage hated jazz, and that's fucked up.
Yeah. You know, unfortunately.
I'm ribbing you a little bit. It's fine. I'm just sort of kidding. But to me, we have to get outside these boxes, and every like articulation of something puts it in another box. Like, and then when I was telling you before, I'm trying to like maintain my honesty in these things. Like, I have to keep like expanding my awareness, you know, in these regards. And so that's my riff with Cage, is that he had a lot of blind spots. You know, he had a lot of pithy quotes, and it's extremely inspiring to me.
Yeah.
But also like there is a those things. Who has the privilege to not mean something and still be able to like eat and have a job? You know, like. Yeah. When the rock musicians were complaining about like, hey, don't even put experimental on the flyer. It's like putting "Don't Come" on the flyer. Why would you put experimental on the flyer? Just put "Don't Come." I want people to come, so I'm going to put rock and roll on this. You know, like it'll access them. You know, like experimental music does not make sense from a capitalistic perspective at all. It just doesn't, and it won't fit in with capitalism. And if you are trying to sell your work, you have to be, you know, your work is ingratiating to the largest number of people, but you know, the long tail of the internet being what it is, anybody can find each other these days, so you can still be a super weirdo and sell records. I'm not saying that you can't, but you can still, you know, make good on Bandcamp Fridays. I'm saying like there is an approach to listening and sound itself that needs to like understand the words it's using when it talks about that. You know, like you're experimenting, you're not being told for what it is. Like media these days is so rich and luscious and conscripting and hypnotic that it will scoop you out and remove your ability to like actually get what you want, like find what you want, you know, like that's the downside of digital malleability. It's desire based. You can dial anything in you want, but who are you? What do you actually want? So when you're young, you try a bunch of stuff out, and then if something catches, you're like, that's my identity, you know, like. But a desire based, like the digital stuff is like, here's who you are, here's who you are, here's who you are, instead of how it used to be, what in my conception, which is every machine had its own foibles, had its own constraints, and you find out who you are by hitting those constraints, and how you react to those constraints of the very machines that you use becomes your identity. now we spend time dialing in our apparent desires, and the price of getting what we want is it's not what we wanted anymore, and it's not actually who we are. So that's like how I get back to tapes, because those constraints never leave, and I still know who, like, I can find who I am inside of this. Whereas if you like go to TikTok or something like that, I'm like, I like look at it, and then 7 hours go by, and I'm like, what have I done? Who am I now? Oh God, you know, like they like the technology these days is really fucking good. The samplers, amazing. Ableton, amazing, but it makes Ableton music, and to get it to not make Ableton music, you're going to have to work really hard. And so what do people do? They fucking go get tapes and stick them into Ableton. You know, you go buy a sampler pack that's literally someone who has gone to a hardware store and hit everything and recorded it and edited it all and chopped it up and carefully like did the BPMs and listed it all, and now you can go buy it. You know, like, sooner or later, to find yourself, you have to go to the raw. You have to go get back to raw things. And what's the rawest thing? Just turning a microphone on for 20 minutes and then taking that and listening to it, and listening to it so hard that you find all the other sounds that synthesizers can make. You know, like when I go and do field recordings, I'm amazed at, I like listen to it and I'll listen to it again, and then I'll listen to it again. And on the third listen, I'm like, all the sounds that I could potentially ever want to make with the synthesizer are actually within this recording of like just bugs, you know. Like, and you know, music equipment these days is really good, but you still have to put yourself into it. And who are you? And that's like that's the biggest problem, I think, for a young artist that I've struggled with my whole life, which is finding out who you are, you know, like figuring yourself out and all this stuff. The technology is amazing, and you can just click a button and make music, and then you're like, that's me. Is it?
There's a second component to finding who you are, which I think is much trickier, is like, once that moment comes where you do succeed at that goal of, which isn't so much finding, but spreading the message of who you are, how do you not let that prison of other people's opinions, how do you not let that conform you to their interpretation of who you are, rather than
it's really fucking hard. It's really, really, really hard. And I would argue it's only getting harder because the it's so good. Like I'm
oh sorry. The world is, thanks to everyone using the same platforms. Like, billions of people are using TikTok, billions of people are using Snapchat and Instagram. The world is becoming so homogenous that it's becoming harder to get out of these boxes and let alone monetize these things, you know.
And I think we know on a deep level, somewhere down there on a deep level, we know. I mean, like, you look at TikTok, and my favorite thing about TikTok is that, to me, it's actually this weird kind of synthesizer. You know, every meme is a cry for help. No, what I mean is that, like, TikTok is like the screen, the like, I'm gonna make a new TikTok. It's a little synth. You know, you take some music, you take a video, and you put words over it. Those three aspects of it, you've got reading, you've got sound, and you've got video. It's a tiny, or like anything on your phone, like just editing something really quick you shot on your phone. Your phone is a synthesizer. Your phone is a sampler. TikTok itself, the platform, is a synthesizer, but it's an extremely carefully curated and carefully designed addiction synthesizer. It's a synthesizer designed to be as addictive as possible. So if you can handle that, some people have addictive personalities and can't handle it all, and some people are like, I can do anything and just for a little bit and completely cut. Like, it depends on how your brain chemistry works, you know. But so, you know, like, there's this thing with me where I delight in the new platforms that are homogenizing our whole lives because they're just so effective. When I say good, like, the technology is just so effective in what it's doing. You go and you want to go buy, like, I had this experience recently. I was trying to buy a piece of equipment that I needed for a project I'm working on. I'm doing a bunch of research on what would be the most effective piece of equipment. It's been a while since I checked in with Roland samplers, you know, like I had like an SP404. I had an SP202 or something. You know, I had like the Dr. Sample, like the old red, and you know, the red one. And I was like, oh, geez, I remember not liking it or like being pissed off about it, but like 15 years ago. And then I was like trying to figure out, I'm like, well, I need to do this project. I need a piece, I need a sampler that can do this, 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 and this. And then I'm like reading about all the different samplers, and then the new one just came out that they had, and I'm like, oh fuck, they solved every single problem I ever had. And it's updatable. Like, this is the most, like, I have like, you know, that moment, that gearhead moment, the gear acquisition syndrome moment where you're addicted to it and you're like, the potential is just so amazing. I could do anything, and you just like walk into the sea, you know. But it's still like hard to use it to make music that it wasn't designed to make. You know, no matter what, everything has its own problem, and it's always the same problem. It makes the music it was designed to make. The company, all the people working on it, all the like geniuses, all the people, they built such an amazing product. You know, like I've been involved in like product design before. It's a lot of work. Writing a manual for something is an amazing creative endeavor. And then some jerk like takes it, some like amazing artist takes it and then just like smashes it and makes something amazing, and like that's what I'm interested in. You know, so it's like you're trying to find your identity. Who are you? It's like, well, I am a pile of cassette tapes on the porch in the sun, and you've left it in the sun, and then you play that, and the exact difference in sound between when it sat in the sun for an hour versus when it didn't is my sonic identity. You know, so, you know, you're like who are you? It's like, well, I am when you do the DJ looper effect on the snare but not the hi-hat. You know, like that's me. That's my sonic identity. So like you like the things threaten to become you, and you threaten to become the things. You know, we're externalizing our nervous system to get things done. And the problem with my problem with contemporary stuff, even though TikTok and contemporary platforms are technically amazingly designed synthesizers, is that they have a lot of bloat and agenda in them, where they're trying to addict you and get you to spend all your time in there and give them all of your money, and they wouldn't care if you were just on their app like dead and your finger was still clicking. You know, like that's not a musical instrument. That is like not something made for one human to give another human their meaning in sound. That's distinct. Like people are getting a lot done with that. You know, like these platforms aren't what they say they are. They're just to drive ads and conscript you and like addict you. They're not actually to communicate with your friends, to give information, and yet a lot of information does get disseminated. A lot of people do use the secondary tier of what these platforms are. The cool thing about getting into musical machines is that the sampler doesn't try to like sell you things, you know, when you're using it after you've bought it. It's in this old paradigm. No prescription necessary. Like pretty soon they're going to throw absolutely all of our tools onto subscription services, and we're not going to be able to do anything without paying a monthly fee. But for right now, the synthesizers are amazing. You pay one fee and then you get it, and it doesn't try to sell you vodka while you use it. You know, you can still fucking make weird ass music with beautifully designed contemporary synthesizers, and there's the marriage between when I can take like the most disgusting, objectively pop musically terrifying sonic architecture and control it using like amazingly contemporary synthesizers that don't try to sell me vodka. It's a good time to be alive, because we have the history, and we're right before when they make all music equipment try to sell you something in between using it.
Yep. Are you familiar with the album Trout Mask Replica?
Of course. My father used to play that album at me in the crib.
That's amazing. I wish my dad would do that. Instead what I got was Blue October. So.
Well, you know, we all start somewhere. My parents are real weirdos in that respect. I mean, they like, I'm a New Yorker. They like raised a weird New York artist on purpose, I think. So I'm lucky. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. More power to you and your parents. So yeah, that's basically yeah, the whole message of taking an instrument that was designed very specifically for a specific sound, then manipulating it, that's literally what the whole album is. It takes every instrument and using it for things that they weren't made for. And yeah, so that's the
So like,
of that is
so like the guitars are playing the bass. It's been a while since I checked into the history of that album, but yeah, it's famous.
yeah, and yeah, every instrument it plays notes that are out of the range of their standard tone, and that's why I like the work of people like William Ackerman and Ian Hedges. I mean, they throughout their whole careers they never wrote a song in standard tuning. They all used different tunings, and I'm kind of going through that struggle myself. Where's the alternative for the standard tuning? And it's hard because there's a reason it became so successful.
And why is it hard? Is why it's hard because it's in everything. Like it's in most of the things because everything has been cogently designed to speak together. But if you don't want to live in that orthodoxy, what do? Like those dudes just never came back. They walked out of the contemporary tuning and they never came back, and you realize that you never have to. Like I don't know, like I spent a lot of time like joking that I'm like a terrible noise like sound pervert because I just enjoy things that I don't see other people enjoying. But then via the internet you can find each other, like you can feel normal like in that sense. It's like it's a funny thing, but like it really shows you it's like the upside of the downside of the stupid internet, where we like, whoops, we connected all our nervous systems, oh my god, humans are terrible and they're glorious and we can all find each other in our beauteousness. Wonderful. But like you can never come back. Like go outside the standard tuning, go and never come back, because most music is just like 3 blues riffs, like or something. Some shit like that. I don't know.
Afro,
but
yeah, or Afro-Cuban rhythms from the slave trade.
Or lo-fi hip hop, lo-fi hip hop beats. That's where I'm at right now. I'm really trying to like, what is this? How did this take over the world? Why is everything lo-fi hip hop beats? But wait a minute. Is that you just take the boom bap and you put it onto like a cassette and just take all of the low frequencies out of it? Like what is this low free like it's like like lo-fi hip hop beats to chill and study to, like took over like that's like a certain type of like glorious heroin grade homogeny that like never fails to disappoint. So yeah, I'm like trying to like destroy those things in my life now, and like get away from like, what is all this lo-fi? How lo-fi? You mean like terrible? But like yeah. So I spent a lot of time like seeing myself and my sonic interests reflected in the normal world and feeling like a terrible pervert. But there's all sorts of like weird worlds out there, and like you like playing strange music like this and like listening to too many field recordings and filling your house with ancient music equipment that is all broken is a grand tradition. Like it's a grand tradition in this world. Like it's very funny now considering how intensely orthodox and homogenous everything is. Like even 10 years ago, even 15 years ago, like when I was touring a lot more, like there's just like people were just like breaking folk and rock and roll in like really funny, like amazing ways. And like I feel like I feel like I can't even understand what's out there anymore personally. So I've like gone into kind of like monk on the mountain phase in my life where I'm touring a lot less. I'm doing a lot of like more psycho, less social, like I used to like live in a performance venue and be just completely filled with like the sociality, like other people's like creative forces and energy just would fill me and fill my entire life. And here we are post-COVID, and I don't live in a music venue anymore, and there are no underground music venues anymore, maybe. I don't know. Like, it's like the second I stopped doing it, they all disappeared. No, it's not true, but there's like, I've changed in my life, and so now I'm trying to like really get more granular with, I'm trying to go and actually roll around in the tapes a little more rather than making tape after tape after tape. Oh, you mentioned Aki Onda. He was incredibly inspiring to me and still is to this day. Like
Yeah,
that's my tape friend. He's my tape friend.
you know,
I do. I played with him several times. I really enjoy his approach to cassette-based work. It's a lot more organized. I feel like he's a lot more organized than I am, which is a type of creativity, which I greatly respect. And my creative struggle is always like trying to head myself off at the past and at the past in terms of tapes. Like I'm making tapes and then like trying to relate to the person who made that tape, who's different than the person I am now. You know, like it's like kind of like it's like a time travel thing. It's like a time problem where you make a recording and then it's a recording of you and you're not that person anymore. So Aki Onda, for me, his work is always like remembering, you know, cassette memories. Like remember, like really walking on the edge of your memory and really like, what is your memory? Where are you in time? Like his work always gives me that, you know, where sonic conceptual memory diving, and everything you hear is a sonification of memory. So that's sort of how I relate to his work. And my approach to tape is less about memory and more about kind of raw time, like more about like, that's not even my memory anymore. I don't even know that person, you know, like we're created anew each second, and we have to just scramble to rebuild our identity in every second, that kind of thing. That's like something in my music practice.
and there's a really simple question. Speaking of your music, of all of your many records and releases, which one's your favorite?
Well, I have to say, I've missed a lot of opportunity. I've never said this before outside of my brain. I've missed a lot of opportunities in my life to put records out that I wish I would have. From being just like a crazy person who can't, you know, actually just record something and send it to someone. Like I've fucked up a lot. I've not released a lot of records I should have, if that makes any sense. My favorite record I've ever released is it's like ones I did with the band. Like I really enjoyed the records that I put out when I was in the band Wooden Wand and the Vanishing Voice. I was having a good time collaborating with my friends. Those aren't like my records though. Those are collaborative, you know, records. Yeah. My favorite records are, I made a tape called Winter's Grip once. I was very cold and didn't have heat. I always liked that. I always liked that tape I put out. I also put out a tape called Nova Crimes, and it was when I was immersed in a lot of William Burroughs kind of Nova Trilogy stuff, if you're familiar with the work of the writer William Burroughs.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so I am basically a character escaped from from the Nova Trilogy. I'm like, and I mean that quite literally. I have been involved in a theatrical project of putting on the Nova Trilogy for the stage for like I've been working on this project with a bunch of artists, and we've been doing it for like maybe 8 years at this point. I've been like working on this, like developing this piece. We've performed it a bunch of times, but inside, while working on this theatrical project, you find chapters inside the Nova Trilogy that describe like exactly what I do. And I remember reading the Nova Trilogy when I was in college, and then like going from some of the tape manipulation passages in those novels, and then like playing around, making me play around with tapes, and then you get to this point where you're like, I don't know, if you go watch, there's a movie called Decoder that Burroughs is in, and it's an East German movie, kind of taking some of William Burroughs's writings and kind of just making a movie out of them. It's about like a guy who works at McDonald's and then uses a cassette tape to like break people's brainwashing, and then it's kind of science fiction, and William Burroughs is in it. And there's a scene in that movie where like the main character, like hears a frog die and then catches the frog dying on tape and then is like making this like frog death rattle like jam in his house with just by rewinding the cassette tape. And I remember being like, that's me. There I am, like on screen. It's like the only time I've ever seen myself on screen as a musician, you know, like there I am. That's me. So actually, that's the answer. It's like the record I haven't put out yet is my favorite record.
My favorite of yours. I mean, it used to be Heliocentric Worlds. Now it's Peace Ninja.
Oh my God. Well, that's amazing. Peace Ninja is a deep cut, my friend. That's some deep stuff. Okay, so Peace Ninja is, I think it's on White Tapes. My friend Russell Harper put it out. He was in that band Blues Control for a really long time, and maybe still is. I haven't checked in, but it's an amazing, one of the most experimental rock and roll bands that's not rock and roll that used to play in DIY Brooklyn in the early 2000s. Anyway, but he had a great label and he put out that record, but that record is like me living in the venue full time. That's my world. Like I really, that record specifically is I was living in the Silent Barn in Queens, New York, having shows in our house every day and just like, what is my life? Like just like living fully in the drink of other people's lives. Like as your art, like you're applying yourself, and you know, anything that I'm sampling just outside. There's so much activity, so much energy that to just stick a tape recorder outside the door to your room and hit record gets the most amazing sample. Like everything around you is the most amazing sample ever. So that was a real like me being boiled in like social artistic art making with people, like just hitting it really hard, really punk times in my life. So yeah, that's a good one. Good memories from that thing. You know. And
then last question for you is just the main message we've tried to conceptualize. How do we get young people and future generations excited to think and perform outside of this orthodoxy and all these boxes that's been implanted on us in the music?
Well, what's the best way? Okay, I'll tell you a little anecdote that kind of is when I think about your exact question that you just asked me, I think about this anecdote. Okay, I'm in my studio in Brooklyn. My studio is attached to the music venue. The studio has a bunch of other studios around it, like right next door.
Yeah, one time. We have about 7 minutes left, so just.
Oh, okay. I'll wrap it up. Okay, so my answer to your question is, I think the kids are generally going to be all right because the vast and punishing orthodoxy and homogeneity of everything cannot escape the active and aware and seeking youthful artist. Like, the second you start trying to make art and actually commit to it in your mind, it's like putting on the glasses in They Live. You, in the movie They Live, the John Carpenter movie, you suddenly see how far you have to, that you don't have to go far to get outside of this homogeny. You know, the homogeny and the monoculture is so much more intense than it was even 10 years ago that I think to make art and to make art these days, like, I think you really have to break that first. And I think what happens is young artists are going to have to go to the raw data. You listen to what's actually happening. You take stock of all of the information the sonic information coming into you, into your, you know, that you're digesting, and you get your machine that you have facility with, you get your sampler, you get your axe, you know, like the thing that you scour the world with, and you hoover it up, and that's how you deal with it. So I think like encouraging the remixing of everything would probably do it. Like a youthful artist, if I can remember how my mind works, is I'm like, I don't care how oppressive and intense the chaos is. I'm going to immerse myself in all of it, and I'm going to come out the other side because I'm going to take it and put my own spin on it and remix it. What you find is that your brain breaks at a certain point because there's too much. They do it on purpose to overload you, to catch you, to keep you, to conscript you. So it's in this moment when you want to throw yourself into it and remix everything, and then you realize human limits and the limits of your own sanity, and inside there you find your identity. How can we get young artists to do this? I think if you want to stay sane, you do this naturally. Like, I think that this, like, my work for me is just me trying to stay sane in a world that is completely insane and yet is gaslit to be called sane all the time. Like, this is not good. Things are not good. And just using your art practice to stay sane as a sanity producing process, I think articulating it this way, hey, you want to stay sane? Like, get outside this, like mush it up, get into lower fidelity, see the edges, see the glitches, switch rampantly and hard between the different medias that require you to accept them as the whole world and to gaslight you and to tell you that that is the only world out there. Quickly switch between those worlds in a rhythm. That's how you do it. That's how you encourage the like enjoyment and prompt the enjoyment of stuff outside of the box. Weird ass shit, weird fidelity. It's not going away. They can't kill it. Monoculture will not win. You can't do it.
Love that answer. I love it. Love straightforwardness. So, thank you so much for doing this. It has been an absolute honor, and it's been a beautiful conversation that we've had. And I hope you have an amazing day.
All right, John. Well, thank you very much. It's been a very positive experience. You know, someone contacts you on the internet and you don't know how it's going to go. So I'm very happy. This has been a lovely conversation, and thank you very much. It's like every time people ask me questions like this, I learn a little bit more about myself, and that's all why I like this kind of stuff. So, you know, you always wind up articulating stuff you don't think you do. You don't think you can articulate. So I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this kind of stuff.
All right. I appreciate it. I'm grateful to have the opportunity to talk with you. All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
No problem.